Hello! Today I am going to talk about my Mosaic glass lampshade that I finally finished that goes with the base that I did a few weeks ago. So this is a very eclectic kind of not round lampshade. So I made these pieces with different pieces of hoops and wire. These right here are actually the metal hoops that you can buy for different types of dream catchers or other items, and I cut them. The reason I'm using them is they're very stiff wire. Here I have a bunch of mosaic shapes of all different sizes and tints of blue that I have foiled with 7/32 inch foil. Now I took these ribs that I cut out of the hoops, and I'm using a piece of paper as kind of a pattern to keep them all pretty much the same is my idea. And I am using my mosaic pieces to fill the spaces between the ribs of this semicircle that I cut from the hoop. Now, another reason why I use those hoops instead of just a plain piece of copper wire is, besides that they're very stiff, they're keeping the shape of the semicircle all pretty exact. So when I made this shape for my shade, all these rib sections would be the same. So I'm using different colors and shapes of mosaic glass and soldering them in wherever they seem to fit. So most of the mosaic pieces I'm using the full shape, and some of them I actually cut the mosaic triangles or rhombuses or rectangles into smaller pieces and foiled them for this project. So right now I'm making I believe there were 5 ribs, because it was ended up being a star shaped at the top. So I'm making a bunch of these and using different shapes. I had to figure out which ones would fit. I wanted to have different colors, obviously, for the different ribs. Now remember, the base was made with all these multi-blues mosaic pieces, and so I want the top to go with that base that I made. So I'm using the same glass that I used in the base that I did earlier. And now I'm tacking this in place so that it meets that that shape I drew on the piece of paper. I guess I'll put another one at the top to kind of hold the top together. That glove I'm wearing on my left hand is a silicone glove that I've used in the past, and it helps dissipate the heat and keep your hands clean. It's kind of a challenge to find the silicone gloves. In fact, I tried to find them lately and I couldn't find any. So although the gloves last many times, you can wash them and they work for many projects, I really wanted to get a new bunch and I could not find them. Right now I'm using a Novacone or Noracone, something like that, flux, kind of that yellowish green flux. It's a liquid flux. I'm not sure if I like it as much as the gel flux that I've used in the past. So kind of the jury's still out on that flux, but I have a whole jar of it, so I'm going to use it. I do like to try different materials. It's just that sometimes they don't work as well as other pieces that other products that I may have used. So right now I am filling in more areas of a rib, and I'm finishing up soldering both sides of the project. And here again, you don't want to heat up your glass too much while you're soldering. You want to kind of jump around a little bit. But these particular pieces for this project, I used the full 7/32 inch black backed copper foil to foil these pieces. So they're actually attached very securely. So it's not quite as much of a worry if I heat the glass up too much, because it's not going to pop out, because it's really quite nicely sandwiched in the foil. So even if the foil doesn't stops adhering as much to the glass as one would like, it still the solder's wrapping around the whole piece of glass, so that will help hold it together. And yeah, when there's a large gap, I will fill it with a scrap of glass that I have cut. So I cut a whole bunch of different shapes. But if the shape is really quite small, I will just fill it with solder. Sometimes I'll add a piece of wire, maybe even like bent up a little bit, and shove that into the void and put solder on that. Because if your section that you have void is really small, it's not going to do you any good to cut another piece of glass and foil it, because once you're done, it's going to end up being completely, the foil's going to completely cover the glass. So, I might as well just fill it with solder, because, instead of foiling another piece of glass, it's not going to do any good. So these pieces that I actually cut right there are pretty much as small as I will use for this project, because anything smaller will just pretty much disappear once I solder it and foil it and solder it. And like most of my projects, this is a three-dimensional, with lots of little pieces. The solder joints are not going to be super smooth like some traditional stained glass work. It's going to have texture to it. Even if I try to make the solder joint nice and smooth one direction, once I try to make another joint going the opposite direction, it will tend to glop up the one that I already made. Thus, it will never really look as smooth and perfect as a standard stained glass, like stained glass window that someone might make. So even if I try, as you see, I'm trying to go nice and smooth between them, it won't end up being perfectly smooth. So I'm kind of trying to keep the texture from one direction of soldering similar to the other direction, because I didn't want it to be like one directionable solder swishes. I wanted it to kind of be omnidirectional and go all over. So even though this is probably the back side or the inside of my lampshade, I am going to solder the inside and the outside, because that way that part is done. The patina that I end up using will cover it nicely. If you look inside the lamp for some weird reason, you will see a nice smooth surface as much as the outside, and it'll be stronger having been soldered from both directions. And also, because this particular project, I'm not having gaps between the glass, so light's not going to be able to go between these pieces of glass. The fact that I'm soldering both sides will ensure that I haven't missed any little parts. As you see, I have tweezers there that I'm using to pick up the little scraps of solder that I have. And those tweezers are have silicone ends to them, so they don't stick to the solder. I am now attaching these ribs to that kind semi-octagonal shape that I created. And you can see that that shape that I created that they're soldered to is also attached to a hoop. Now, the reason why I used one of those macrame hoops is because they're really strong and perfectly circled. I also have a purchased star that I covered in foil. Now, the reason why I cover these things in foil is, as I said before, that way the solder will actually stick to them, because most of the hoops that you buy will be made out of some weird alloy. I mean, you can test it to see if it'll accept solder, but most of the time they won't. And you can bypass that problem by just covering them up with foil. I'm using a star shape at the top, and that will be to hold the top of these ribs that I made nice and symmetrical around the star, around the lampshade. So yeah, I didn't know exactly how these were going to sweep up. I drew it out on paper to try to figure out exactly what I wanted, but until it's all put together, it's hard to really visualize how they will go, but they ended up doing what I wanted them to do. So they're kind of sweeping from the bottom of the shade and up to the top. I wanted kind of a different shape than just flat, because if you remember, the base that I made also had different ribs on it, kind of going around and around and around at a sweep. And I wanted them to go together. I wanted the shade to go with the same kind of style as the base. Now, remember, the base was one that I had bought from actually a thrift store, a Goodwill store. So I started out with that piece, and now I'm just trying to make the shade to go nicely with it. Soldering all the sides of your copper foil, your pieces, as you go along will just help make it easier in the long run. So I drew pieces of paper by laying it against where I want, and then I cut pieces of glass to fill those shapes. And I also put straight copper wire, as you can see by my left finger there, going straight up from one part up to the star-shaped top. And now I'm attaching the clear textured glass to the ribs that I made. And I will bend that wire that I have on my left hand there and kind of hold it in place so that it's smooth against the glass. And I actually bought a whole bunch of textured glass because I wanted the different pieces of textured glass to be different textures. So I have a nice variety. And I'm using clear glass for this part because I wanted to break up the mosaic part, because I felt that if I used blue glass in the rest of it, that it would detract from the funness of the ribbed areas that I made. So I wanted to leave some of it clear. So now I'm trying to hold that wire to the actual clear glass and solder it like right smooth with it. And as you can see, the wire itself is not as perfectly straight and stiff as those ribs were. That's because that wire is probably only like a 14 gauge wire, which is very bendable still, as you can see when I pushed it right there. So I'm going to have to like bend it in place to hold that line, but it'll still act as strength. If I didn't have the wire there and I just had the piece of glass, the foil glass there, I don't think that would have been as strong. Now, as you can see, now I'm attaching a triangular shape that I also cut out of flat glass, and I'm using that kind of at an angle between the other piece of flat glass and the rib itself. So you have your ribs and you have those half moon shaped flat glass, and then I have these triangular pieces. You can see I'm trying to like fill a gap because of the irregular shape and the fact I'm working on a curved surface, it's kind of hard to get everything to fit perfectly. So I'm going to have to fill little areas of the glass here and there to get this all put together. I did make a pattern for each rib area of this, but it's still not, there's still didn't fit perfectly. Now I am adding, now that I got all my ribs and my triangles attached, I'm adding more of the mosaic glass to that space that's left. So it's kind of curved on one side and flat on the other two sides. And I'm putting, as I said, mosaic pieces in between. I decided that all the mosaic pieces I'm putting in these particular areas will all be the same color blue. This is, again, to try not to make it too busy. So I started out by adding just the large pieces so that I know where the large pieces can be. And I knew I wanted to put some large pieces in, so I couldn't like put small pieces in first and then expect the large pieces to just miraculously fit. So I'm picking up different largest pieces and seeing where they can fit. And I'm basically just kind of tacking this stuff in right now. I'm not necessarily soldering everything at this point. The important thing here is to see if I have the right shapes to fill the gaps that I want to fill. And I did end up having to put this whole project on hold for a few days while I waited for another shipment of this particular colored glass because I ran out of it. And that happens, although I try not to have that happen. So I'm using a thick piece of silicone scrap behind the mosaic glass that I have right there to hold the glass in place while I am tacking the glass, soldering it in, because I want it to be flat with the space between the crescent shape and the next rib. I want it like a flat plane between those two. So in order to get that, you have to use something. I could have used a scrap of glass. I could have used cardboard. Cardboard could have gotten a little yucky. But I chose to use a piece of thick silicone sheet that I am holding with my hand there, my left hand there, as I am just kind of tacking the next piece in place. And as usual, I try to solder a whole bunch of pieces together, glass mosaics together, so I have a handful to choose from while I'm doing this, because you can see that I'm kind of mix and matching and trying to figure out which one will fit. But still, there were times when I had to stop soldering and make some more pieces to choose from. Especially when you get kind of toward the end of an area. You know, the first few pieces that you put in, that's really easy. But then you start getting into the, okay, I have a space left. I hope I can find a piece. And you might not. You might have to sit down and cut another piece of glass. This obviously took a long time to make this particular lampshade, and it took, besides a lot of glass, it took a lot of solder. So you're dealing with a lot of solder joints, and obviously if this was all one piece of solder for each section, it would have been a lot less foil and a lot less solder. But I happen to have fun with the look of having lots of different pieces, and the all the different solder joints is kind of what I do. So now I am filling in any gaps that I have and finishing the solder joints that I had not finished earlier. And perhaps I need to smooth out a few of those, and that's okay. This is a great time to do it. When I'm done with an area, for this particular project, I am back soldering as I go along. And it's a little easier if you do this than wait till the end, but it's not necessary. You can just wait till you're completely finished with the whole project and then back solder pieces. So it's whatever works for you. And you know, you don't have to back solder. It's just that, you know, as I said earlier, if you do back solder, it will end up being stronger, more attractive, and you won't have the problem of maybe having little gaps. And yes, I'm fluxing everything before I solder.
When I'm just tacking something in place, I don't always flux because usually I can get it to flow well enough for tacking something. But when I'm trying to make all the solder joints look good and do large areas, if you don't flux first, it just doesn't flow very well at all because this kind of solder is made to go with flux. It's not, that doesn't have flux. It's not a resin, or it's not a solder that has rosin inside of it. That's, pre-solder in the middle of all of the tube of solder. It expects you to use flux. So you can buy rosin solder. It's usually a no clean solder, but it often will, if you use a no clean, it's going to be harder to get the flux off. And for stained glass work, you want the flux to be removed. Usually you don't want that yucky residue of flux left on the project when you're done. And plus, if you use a no clean solder, the flux may start out being clear, but it will yellow with age, and you're not going to want that with a stained glass work. So you're going to want to use a water soluble system so that you can wash off the flux. So yeah, my solder comes in a coil like most solder does, and I unwind all of the solder into like straight pieces and then just cut it into like foot long pieces to use. And then when the piece gets short, I usually just kind of put it on my table and go to another piece. And then eventually I will have to use my tweezers and use all those little scraps. If there's an area like that one that I was working on a second ago that is kind of a gap and you're trying to fill that gap, if you kind of like just heat up the solder a little bit above your project and kind of drop it in place, it will tend to fill up that gap. Also, if you let it cool a little and then come back to that spot and then try to drop solder in place, then you have better luck because it won't melt all the way through and then leave your gap again. If you use the side of your solder iron, you can kind of smooth out stubborn areas a little. So as you can see, I haven't finished all the areas. This area right here is one of those that are all with that light blue color. Most of this video is shown at 4 times normal speed. So you can kind of see that it would take even longer, once you actually do something. It does take a while to solder all these pieces. One of the reasons this area where the light blue is done in small pieces, is it that area was no longer flat. So I really couldn't put a flat piece of glass right there because it was still kind of at a curve. I could have put a few flat pieces, instead of one, I could have done it in maybe three pieces and had another area of solid glass, either transparent or I could have chosen a blue. I just thought it would be kind of more fun to have yet another mosaic area. But as you can see, it's not flat. And having the mosaic pieces allows you to kind of do curves. When I was done with that particular part of the lampshade, I decided that the lampshade was just too short to go with the base that I had. So I decided I was going to add to the lampshade itself by adding another rim, one of those macrame rims. And so that's that. It's covered with copper foil right now. So in order for it to be a continual, certain length from the bottom of the other one, I decided I would use some more of these mosaic pieces that, when you buy the mosaic pieces, they're all the same size. So I decided, okay, well, I'll just take some rectangles that are all the same and I will solder them on, and I'll use those rectangles to fill the gap. And that way the circle I'm adding will be a perfect distance from the lampshade that I've already worked on. I'm adding some flux to everything, so it's all ready to solder. So I went around, now that I have my little rectangle already added, and I am now soldering them to this new hoop that I have. Now I do have a whole bunch of hoops in different sizes, so I figured out which one would look the best. I wanted a little bit bigger than the original circumference of my lampshade, and I found this one that's working great, and now I'm just attaching it. So it'll flare out a little bit more than what I already made, and it will add a couple inches. It'll also make a nice barrier kind of between the lampshade and the base. So I took the largest pieces of glass that I had and I soldered them in place periodically to fill the gaps. I decided I was going to use all different colors of blues again for this area. Since I had bought large mosaic in the dark blue and light blue, I'm using those right now. And I know that I only had so many, so that's why I skipped from one area to another, because I wanted to have them balanced nicely. I didn't want to use all the large triangles in one and then find out that I ran out and it was unbalanced to the next area. So I skipped from one area to another, trying to make every area varied, but I wanted them all to have the same number of these pieces. but I also wanted to try to have them varied somewhat. I didn't want each area to look the same. Like, okay, I got a light blue, I got a dark blue, I got a light blue. I didn't want that. As I went along, I decided that no, I guess I'm not going to use all different kinds of blues in this area. I'm going to use just the dark blue and the light blue. So, that's kind of the way I work. I kind of decide as I go. So I have some gaps here. I'm going to fill the gaps with glass when I can get small enough pieces of glass, or make small enough pieces of glass. I will put the small pieces in, and then if I think the piece is just too small, I will just fill that, as I said before, with wire covered in solder or with just solder. And now I am back soldering all of this last area that I did, the last couple inch bottom area that I placed. And as you can see, it is pretty much filled with glass. Yeah, there are a few smaller gaps here and there that I had to fill with solder, but I did cut small pieces of glass that did fit nicely in all the triangles. I had some rectangles, I had some squares, so there's some other various shapes, but they're the same shapes I used up on top, so it would all go together. This is what it looked like when I was finished before I patinaed it. It's very attractive, but I really want the patina look. For one thing, it will go with the base. So I'm using black patina, and I ended up spraying it on. I do like to spray things on that are three-dimensional like this because it uses less patina, and it's a little bit faster than just brushing it on with a toothbrush, but I do that too sometimes. So thanks for watching. As you can see, the bottom and the top look very nice together, and I was very happy with this look. Thank you. Bye-bye.